Hey guys, Zack Mars here, and this is my review of Trollhunters Tales of Arcadia. Okay, so this episode, it's about time essentially what happens is, Jim, in this episode, Jim has way too much on his plate. But it does tie into the main plot-related thing where they're looking for the Kairosect, and we do find out what the Kairosect does and how it helps with that. But this episode is also, well, more so. This episode is also about Anger Rod, even though he's not in it much. But he's in it like at the beginning and at the very end. But it is important because it does establish some parts of his some parts of his backstory and where he comes from, and more importantly, what kind of a threat he'll be now going forward because of plot-related reasons, which we'll get into. But in any case, speaking of which, this episode actually opens up in the 11th century where we actually meet late 11th century, like 1200 AD, something like 1290, I want to say AD. But in case we meet Anger Rot, who is a bit younger. He has a bit of a healthier sounding voice to him, and he's currently on a raft, is sailing to a sort of ruin that he knows has magical spirits attached to it. So he goes to this place to go and get some sort of information, go and get some sort of power that he seeks. And of course he eventually arrives at the dwelling where he eventually comes out of his raft and insists that he has claims that he's come to seek aid and just hollers to nobody in particular. But also proceeds to refer to the being that's supposed to live there by several names: Baba Yaga, Lady Pale, the Eldritch Queen. At which point, after being referred to a couple of times, we hear a female voice called back from the darkness, and we don't get a good look of who's actually speaking, but we do kind of sort of make out somewhat, not really. And we get to see very few glimpses of her. We see her hands. That's about it. But of course, the voice, the disembodied voice, proceeds to tell Angerot that she's known by many names. And wonders what exactly it is that brought him to the place where she inhabits, essentially. And he goes on to explain how his village had been ravaged by Gunmar's forces, and that he came to seek for great power so that he could help them. And of course, the woman responds that he clearly has come to seek magic, and he insists that yes, he has come there for magic so that he can help his people. At which point the voice asks him what he would like, why she should help him, and what he'll get in return. At which point he proceeds to take his knife and carve off a piece of his own living flesh and gives it to her, and as an offering, and tells her that it's carved from his own stone, and she responds that it will do nicely. At which point she proceeds to fashion it into the Infernocopula, and in return gives him the magical power he so sought. And Angerot is overjoyed about his newfound magical power, but then quickly senses something is wrong when he starts to feel empty. And sure enough, we then see his soul proceed to fly out of him and into the Infernocopula, revealing that it does in fact contain his soul. I mean, we knew that. But it does double confirm that what exactly happened to him, about how he lost his soul. We actually see that. Of course he's insistent to know what she did, and insists that she tricked him, and that he wouldn't have done that if he wouldn't have made his Faustian bargain if he had known she was going to take his soul. But she merely responds that she gave him exactly what he asked for, telling him that he had asked for great power but didn't really care about the cost. At which point she puts on the ring and tells her that now he will be her champion, and tells him to seek out Merlin's champions, his Trollhunters, and with no real choice in the matter, Angerot proceeds to climb back on his raft and sails away into the darkness, howling in anger that he had been tricked. and that he had lost his soul. Meanwhile, back in the present, Jim arrives at Ojos de Salado and requests from the volcano trolls that he seek an audience with Gato. And of course, Gato is not particularly happy to see Jim, like, at all. Although he does note that Jim doesn't really pose much of a threat to him, since he also observes that Jim doesn't have his amulet with him. And of course, Jim proceeds to point out that he's here to make a bargain. And that he's there for the Kairosect. And of course, Gato points out the very obvious problem is that the last time Jim came to get something from him, Toby gave him indigestion. So for that reason, he's very hesitant to let Jim have anything else of his. And proceeds to ask him why he should let him live, considering what happened last time. At which point Jim just points out that he'll trade the Kairosect for a riddle. At which point Gato kind of is a little bit intrigued and kind of amused, pointing out that obviously he's the master of riddles, and that there's no way in hell Jim is going to have one that he hasn't heard before. At which point Jim asks him if he can probably prove him wrong, and proceeds to tell him the riddle, "What is cheese that isn't yours?" And of course, Gato does think that, and of course all the trolls, including Gato, are kind of thrown for a loop for a minute and don't know what the answer actually is. But then Gato starts thinking it through what any possible answers that might be. And eventually he answers that the answer is nacho cheese, which, is a riddle everybody knows. So I don't think I need to explain that. But at which point Jim points out that it's not show day either. At which point Claire brings everybody else in via her shadow staff. Blinky tosses Jim his amulet. And at which point Toby props Gato's mouth open with his warhammer, and they just dive right into Gato's stomach. And Gato is very angry that they're going inside his stomach to steal something from him again. So he orders several of his volcano trolls to go in after them, and sure enough, he just swallows them, so they go in to fight after him. And Jim winds up fending them off with his sword, while the rest of the group proceeds to poke around in Gato's stomach until they find what they're looking for. And eventually, and Toby points out that he wishes that he misses the old days where they were dealing with gnomes, but eventually, by accident I should mention, he does eventually find the Kairosect, and it's this little diamond-shaped thing. It's this little diamond-shaped thing that can actually be placed upside down or right side up, depending, because there's a little stand on the top where you can just set it right on the table like that. But of course, Blinky is happy that they found the Kairosect so easily, and then suggests that they make their exit. Although he does eventually realize that he should have worded himself a little bit correctly, and he realizes that he's going to regret saying that. At which point, Toby then proceeds to call to the mountain troll, to the volcano trolls who are currently busy with Jim, and then proceeds to pull out a burrito. And tells them that their boss didn't like the tacos he gave him last time, and points out that the thing he's brought with him, that the burrito he's brought with him, is way worse. I don't know all the specifics about all the fillings and all that, but he points out that it'll take a lot of preparation to actually stomach properly, and Gato hasn't had that. At which point he proceeds to throw it into Gato's stomach, and Gato proceeds to kind of get, he once again has indigestion and poops them all out. At which point, everybody leaves, and Jim is just happy that they got away relatively unscathed. While Gato just laments the fact that the Trollhunters have once again caused him indigestion, and he is obviously not happy about that. But in any case, they then proceed to return back to Blinky's library, where they point out that the Kairosect, where they now proceed to muse over the Kairosect, with Claire wondering how exactly it is that the Kairosect is going to help them with their problem. At which point Blinky picks it up to inspect it, pointing out that he absolutely has no idea. But then he presses a button on the side of it, and suddenly he's just gone, and everybody's just very confused as to where he went. And eventually they look around to discover him on top of a bookshelf, with him being very giddy about what just transpired. And what we find out He's is that Blinky has figured out what it does. That he can actually step outside. That the Kairosect enables somebody to step outside of time and essentially move within stopped time. And in order to demonstrate the point, he uses another charge on the Kairosect, and he proceeds to just go and disappear and reappear again. This time, messing with the rest of the group in the process to demonstrate his abilities. With Toby and Claire being very disoriented as to what happened, but of course Claire points out that that they realizes that this is their way of getting the Inferocopula off Strickler's finger without him realizing it, and of course, once he's actually deciphered the runes on the Kairosect, Blinky concludes that the Kairosect has 3 rules that need to be followed. And of course, Toby, of course, is only half paying attention at this point, because he points out all the various things that they can use the Kairosect for, pointing out that it will give them literally infinite time to do whatever they want. But of course, Blinky points out that that's not actually the case. As he points out, first and foremost, there are 3 rules that the Kairosect is bound to. First and foremost, only one person can step outside of time. Second, the Kairosect's time stop will last exactly 43 minutes and 19 seconds, which means it's not an infinite amount of time. You've got a very limited amount of time and window to actually do what you need to do and be finished. And finally, we do figure out that this causes the conflict of the episode, and Blinky winds up doing something stupid. We'll explain that in a minute. But what happens is the third rule, and this is probably the most important, and again, this is one of the more important ones, is that the Kairosect can only stop time thrice. And of course Jim quickly figures out that it means that Blinky has in fact wasted 2 of their shots, and now they've only got 1 charge left on the Kairosect before it's essentially just useless. And of course Blinky points out that he didn't know, and to be fair, Blinky didn't know. He didn't know that the Kairosect was limited to only being able to stop time thrice. He didn't know that until he actually read the runes. But it does point out that he only used the Kairosect once to test it out and once to demonstrate what it does. But yeah, he wasted 2 shots and then eventually figured out it only has 3 shots total. So yeah, unfortunately of course Jim points out that means they've only got 1 shot left, and they need to use it to stop, and they're going to need to use it to stop Strickler, at which point Blinky assures Jim that they are going to need to use it to stop to find out where Strickler is before they actually use it, so I can very easily get it back from him. And of course Claire points out that that's all well and good, but also points out that maybe he can use it. That maybe if he has time, he can use the Kairosect to ace his Spanish final, which of course Jim quickly realizes that he forgot about, and if he doesn't do it, he's going to have to repeat. He's going to have to go to summer school, and he's going to have to repeat. He's going to have to repeat Spanish, which of course Jim is not very much looking forward to, because we've established that Senior Rule is a bit of a hard ass. He's a little gruff and mostly unfeel. He's got his moments. I've established that he's got his moments, especially in 3 Below. But he's a bit of a hard ass and doesn't really like it when people slack off in his class. He's a little strict, but he's a good person deep down. But he is very strict. But of course Jim realizes quickly that he needs to study, but does take the Kairosect from Blinky first. And does point out that they'll figure it out tomorrow. At which point, Jim then proceeds to return home and proceeds to spend the whole night studying. At one point during the evening, his mom comes in and offers him an omelet, and tells him that if everything is going okay, and that if he's having a bit of a busy schedule, and of course he points out that everything's fine, and he does appreciate her bringing him the omelet, but of course she points out that she knows he's working hard, but also points out that he should also not focus on, make sure to put some sleep into that busy schedule of his. At which point he tells her that he will. At which point she wishes him good night, and he goes back to studying. In any case, Jim does not in fact get the 8 hours of sleep that he needs, And so he waits, and of course, when he wakes up, well, I should mention that the way he wakes up is that Toby eventually calls him, and in the middle of the morning, and Jim gets up, and Jim answers his phone and wonders why Toby is calling him at 4 in the morning. At which point, Jim has a bit of a panic attack when Toby reveals that actually it's 8:30 and school has already started. And of course, this causes Jim to quickly realize that he slept through his alarm, which Toby comments will be on his tombstone. And of course, Jim quickly realizes that he needs to get to school now so that he can actually finish his Spanish final. At which point, he immediately races out of the house. Not even stopping to take breakfast. He just races out of the house and immediately goes on his Vespa all the way to school. And of course, when he gets to Senior Roll's class, Senior Roll is waiting for him. And of course, he quickly points out, I don't know what he actually says, but Senior Roll comments in Spanish that the hour of death is at hand. I'm pretty sure is what the hour of line is. He says something along the lines of it's the hour of death, my friend. At which point, Jim proceeds to sit down, opens his bag, remembers he has the Kairosect inside of it, and muses over the idea of being able of using the Kairosect to take his final, but also realizing that would be a waste of his shot. So, and eventually decides to just take the test the normal way, pulls out a pencil, but before he can even barely write his name, Senior Roll, obviously Jim was late, so there's only like 5 minutes left in the class. At which point, Senior Roll immediately snatches up the test and makes a bit of a sadistic chuckle before going to sit down at his desk to grade all of the papers. And of course, at his locker, Toby then proceeds to tell Jim that it's not the end of the world and that maybe he'll pass by sheer luck. But of course, Jim points out that he didn't even get through the first page, let alone the rest of the test. And of course, Toby tries to humor Jim, pointing out that maybe he'll pass because of good handwriting, but then realizes that that's wishful thinking and that Jim is most likely going to have to repeat his class. At which point, Claire walks up and posits a theory about the Infernocope and what would happen if Jim actually did the deal with Anger Rot. Specifically, if Anger Rot can be trusted, because obviously Anger Rot, he's killed a lot of Trollhunters, and they do point out that even with his ring, there's no guarantee that he'll, just retire from all of that. There's no way he's going to just retire or stop killing Trollhunters, and specifically he's not going to come after Jim, but even if he has his ring back. So Jim does point out that's a good point, but Toby points out that maybe there's an opportunity, that maybe they could sense an opportunity where they can use the ring to control Anger Rot instead and keep him from killing Jim, which Jim points out would be helpful, but also points out is conflicted because he points out that he should also honor his bargain, because obviously he thinks that Anger Rot would follow his side of the deal if he was so desperate to get his ring back and become all powerful, or so to speak. Obviously, with his ring back, Anger Rot would be his own master again, and he wouldn't have to kill Trollhunters. He could just live his life again, which is obviously why Anger Rot wants the ring back. If he has his soul back, so to speak, he wouldn't have to kill Trollhunters. But of course, as Jim is pondering over all of this, he also points out that he also needs to figure out what to do about his Spanish test and a whole bunch of other things. At which point, Jim gets a phone call. And Jim is very confused as to what's going on. When and of course, as they kind of just lay all of that on him, Jim gets a phone call, and weirdly enough, it's from Bagwell, which Jim points out is suspicious because she shouldn't have his number, and wonders how she got his number. But of course, she calls him and tells him that there's an infestation of gnomes in her shop, and that they've effectively taken over the place. And of course, Jim points out that he'll deal with it, it's just another thing for him to add to the pile of things he needs to solve. But it's at this point where Steve walks up and also piles on. But it's with Steve pointing out that he hopes Jim is ready for the next spring fling contest, which is a book stacking contest. And Steve tells him that there's no hope of him winning because he's going to dominate and he's going to beat everybody else. And of course, this causes Jim to just kind of this causes Jim to get all of these little things requested jumbled up in his head because everybody's making varying requests of him, and eventually he just loses it and just runs out of the school. And of course, Steve is the one to comment, pointing out that that was very weird. Meanwhile, as Jim is dealing with all the stress of all the compounding requests made of him, Blinky is currently meeting up with Barbara, who comments on that he had left so abruptly last time and that he didn't get an opportunity to talk that much. At which point, but Blinky of course tells her that he has her undivided attention. That they're going to just be able to talk and workshop about a bunch of different things, and of course it's at this point where Barbara does proceed to tell Blinky what's been bothering her, namely she talks to him about how some things have been gotten better, but at the same time some things have gotten worse. Obviously she feels like Jim has this secret double life that she doesn't know about, and he's not really opening up to her, and also notes that he's been very busy lately. But she doesn't really know what else to do for him other than to be a supportive mother, since obviously they've been working through all of Jim's emotional roadblocks, so to speak, and they've been trying to get to the root of this problem. And Blinky is initially listening intently to this, but then his eye starts twitching. And of course, we don't fully understand what's happening at first, but as Barbara keeps talking about all of her concerns with Jim, we then eventually find out what's happening. Blinky is turning back into a troll. It took a couple of episodes, but he's finally turning back into a troll, and at the worst possible time. So, first things first, his eye one of his eyes grows back, which, of course, he tries to cover up as a mosquito bite, and Barbara continues talking about her concerns with Jim, but it's at this point where Blinky regrows his missing arms, which of course causes Blinky to realize that he's turning back into a troll, and in an effort to kind of shield himself from Barbara to keep her from finding out what's going on, he picks up the menu and starts reading it rather intently, to kind of cover himself. But she does point out that his behavior, that if wonders if everything's okay, because she points out that he's acting a little odd. But he points out that he's fine, and then points out that there's a large variety of salads that he can order from the menu. But it's at this point where his skin returns back to normal, and at which point he starts smoking because he's sitting out in the sun and is now half troll. And she of course wonders if Blinky is all right, and also wonders why he's smoking. At which point he just lampshades that it's a quote unquote filthy habit. At which point he excuses himself and goes into the restroom. Of course, Barbara is very visibly confused as to what all just transpired. And he runs into the bathroom stall to kind of hide away from the watching eyes of all of the different humans. And one guy in the bathroom with him comments on if he's feeling all right, but then the spell wears off and a massive explosion of gas just bursts out of Blinky. And of course, the guy in the stall in the urinal just comments that that's not normal, and immediately goes to look for a doctor, which conveniently winds up being Barbara. Well, or rather inconveniently, I guess, in Blinky's case, but. And of course, this winds up becoming a problem as well. So, Blinky additionally piles on something else for Jim to do, and proceeds to tell. And of course, Jim is still stressing out over everything else he needs to fix. At which point, he gets a call from Blinky, and Blinky proceeds to tell him what's going on about how he's turning back into a troll, which Jim initially thinks it's a good thing, pointing out that is exactly what Blinky wanted. Until Blinky points out that it's not as good a thing as they would hope, because he's currently stuck in a public restroom, and his mother is beating down the door because she wants to know what's going on with him, and because she's a doctor, she wants to observe him and figure out what's going on with him, because obviously he's been acting strangely and is having some sort of reaction that she doesn't fully understand. So, of course, it's at this point. Of course, Jim realizes quickly what needs to happen, and of course, then proceeds to call it, and then proceeds to tell Claire and to Toby what happens when they finally catch up with him, and proceeds to tell them that there's an issue with Blinky and that he's currently stuck in a public restroom and that they need to get him out and get him back to Troll Market. At which point Claire declares that her Starro stuff is back at her house and that she can go get it. At which point she proceeds to run into oncoming traffic, which of course means she almost gets hit by a truck. And at the same exact time, Barbara is successful at beating down the door to in a stall in the men's restroom, and she sees Blinky, and both of them freak out because obviously this is a very weird position. Obviously, Barbara's never seen a troll, and Blinky is very concerned about the fact that he's effectively been discovered. But of course it is at this point where all of this happens. And Jim, in an effort to save Claire, uses the last charge on the Kairosect, which causes time to stop. And Jim does kind of take a few minutes to figure out what's going on. He takes literally a minute. He takes him a minute to figure out what's going on with everything going on. And after realizing that there's birds frozen in the sky, that Toby and Claire aren't moving, the traffic isn't moving anymore, he eventually concludes what's going on, and proceeds, and realizing that now that he has some time, the first thing he does is scoop Claire up out of oncoming traffic, and also wonders aloud why he even got her involved in this in the first place, but then also looks into her eyes and then realizes that he can never say no to her, and that's probably why. At which point he proceeds to wonder exactly how much time it was, and remembering that Blinky said it lasted 43 minutes and 19 seconds, Jim concludes that he has about 42 minutes left and sets a timer on his phone so that he has all the time he needs to do what he needs. So he quickly goes into the school. He goes into the school to figure out where Strickler is, and discern his whereabouts. And of course, the first place he checks is Strickler's office. But what we find out is that Strickler's office Strickler's not in it, but Jim does discover his day planner and discovers that he's currently at the dentist, which Jim points out is handy information and that he can easily find him now. But as he's about to leave the school, he passes by Senior Ull's office, and remembering that he needs to finish his final, he proceeds to pull his Spanish final out of the pile. Quickly finishes it with time to spare, with a lot of time to spare, and then proceeds to place it back in the pile. But then to mess with Senior Ull, he proceeds to flip his pencil over so that it will bonk him in the head when time restarts. And Jim is satisfied with that, and eventually goes to leave the school, but then discovers that Steve is kind of cheating at the whole book stacking thing. Essentially, what happened was when time stopped, Steve currently had a taller pile than Eli, who was currently building his own pile of books, but he had his dickhead friends knock the pile over. So of course Eli is very dangerously close to actually losing the book stacking contest. So to kind of both A, mess with Steve, and B, ensure that he doesn't win, he then proceeds to reposition Steve's friends so that one is grabbing his ass and one is knocking over his pile of books. And that winds up, and now satisfied that he's accomplished everything he needed to set out, he then proceeds to go out onto the street to go and find Dr. Mueller's office and find his dentistry office. But then remembers that he needs to save Blinky, so he proceeds to scoop Blinky up. And first things first, he notices that Barbara is currently standing outside the stall, so he drags her back to her table and proceeds to just kind of reposition her with a cup of coffee. At which point, he then realizes that he needs something to shield Blinky from the sunlight, so he grabs a tablecloth from a nearby table, wraps Blinky up in it, and then lifts Blinky up over his shoulder, but then also realizes that Blinky is a lot heavier than he thought, and wonders what exactly Blinky's been eating. At which point, with Blinky now successfully bundled up in a little sheet so that he doesn't burn, Jim then proceeds to place Blinky on the back of his Vespa, drives him to Troll Market and drops him off at his library. But then also remembers that he has a gnome infestation to deal with, so he proceeds to scoop up all the gnomes that are currently running amok, and proceeds to put them in a bag, and hands them to a frozen bag dweller, who proceeds to leave Troll Market. At which point he realizes that he only has a little bit more time to actually go and find Strickler. So he immediately makes a beeline to Dr. Mueller's dentistry office, and does note that Strickler is currently on the chair getting his teeth looked at. And first things first, he does take the ring from Strickler, but then realizes he has a golden opportunity to mess with him since Strickler is frozen and can't defend himself. So, and also remembering that she can't hurt Strickler, he decides to do the next best thing. What he does is he screws up Strickler's face while he's in the dentistry chair, and it proceeds to screw up his face so that he can't actually see what's going on. So they can actually, just screws up his face so that the dentistry tools don't really do their job. But then also, to add insult to injury, spits in Strickler's mouth so that he'll have something uncomfortably unpleasant to come back to when he goes into when he gets his dentist office things refixed. But it's at this point where Jim, having successfully done everything he needed to do, then proceeds to wonder if he should that he has exactly just enough time to make a decision on whether or not he wants to give Angerot his ring back or try to control him. So Jim initially toys with the ladder and puts the ring on, and what we find out is that because the ring contains Angerot's soul, it enables the wearer to have a psychic connection to Angerot at all times. Meaning that Jim knows where Angerot is, and more importantly, realizes he still has the kill stone on him. So, quickly realizing that he can get the kill stone back and also make the drop with Angerot, immediately goes to the sewer, knowing now where he is. He immediately goes to the sewer where Angerot is hidden, but only has like a couple more minutes left on his timer before he has to get as far away as possible. At which point he gets very close. He goes to Angerot, and of course Angerot is intently observing the kill stone. He's just holding it. We don't know the full context, but he's holding it, admiring it, what have you. We don't really know. But he then proceeds to scoop the rock. He then proceeds to, after a little bit of prying, he proceeds to successfully scoop the stone out of Angerot's hand, and then proceeds to get back on his Vespa and realizes that he needs to get out of there. But it's at this point where, as he's about to leave the sewer, he then realizes time has restarted because a water droplet has fallen onto his Vespa, and he realizes that he's out of time. And worse yet, the alarm proceeds to go off, and Angerot knows he's there. So that's not ideal. But of course, everything winds up getting magically resolved because Jim used the Kairosect. As we find out, Claire winds up on the lawn of Arcadia High, and quickly realizes that Jim used the Kairosect and saved her from mortal danger, and so she'll thank him for it later. But also we find out that Senior Roll, of course, gets bonked in the head by his own pencil, and is also bewildered that Jim's test is completely filled in, and thought Jim had failed. So he's absolutely bewildered that Jim's test is fully filled. Meanwhile, Steve and his dickhead friends, that goes exactly how we expected. Steve's tower is completely wrecked. He's angry at his friends for screwing around, and because Jim never built a tower of books, Eli is the winner by default. So Eli winds up celebrating, pointing out that he won. Meanwhile, Arg discovers that Blinky is currently in his library and is completely safe, and is also a troll again, and gives him a fierce hug, being happy that he's back. While Bagdwella is happy about the fact that the gnome infestation seems to have solved itself, and is happy about what happened. But of course, that also leaves Jim with one particular scenario that he's stuck in. Angerot now wants to kill him for stealing the kill stone from him, and of course, Jim immediately tries to put the ring on to try and defend himself from Angerot, but Angerot immediately knocks it out, immediately kind of comes after Jim, and Jim tries to defend himself with his armor, but of course Angerot just steals his sword again, and tells Jim that he'll pay for trying to trick him and control him. At which point he attacks Jim, and Jim winds up losing the ring, and it winds up skittering around at their feet as they fight. But and of course Jim is mostly on the defensive because he's not prepared to fight Angerot right now. But what we do find out is that in the process, Angerot accidentally destroys the Infernicopula and his soul along with it while he's trying to kill Jim. And this, of course, causes Angerot to stop for a moment, and he realizes what he and as he realizes and he comes to grips with what he's done. He's visibly distressed about the fact that he's just lost his soul, and for like permanently. Like he didn't have his soul before, but it was in a ring, safe and sound. Here now, he's destroyed the ring with his soul in it, so he doesn't have a soul anymore. And to signify this, his eyes turn from their usual orange to pale white. And of course, Angerot, now devoid of his soul, then proceeds to go into a bit of a rampage. He proceeds to chase after Jim, declaring that he'll kill him, and proceeds to viciously chase after Jim. And Jim is just barely able to escape Angerot. He winds up bringing his Vespa to the edge of the sewer grate where he came in, but realizes that the Vespa and he doesn't fit because of his armor, so he desummons his armor so he can get out, and is able to barely escape Angerot, who has gone into a bit of a frenzy and is currently trying to attack Jim, despite Jim being, safe and sound. And yeah, we'll get to that. Just Angerot has just lost all rational thought, and that is important for this. But of course, Jim, happy about the fact that he's escaped Angerot, proceeds to bring the Killstone back to Blinky, who is happy that they finally recovered it. While Droll went to the sewer where Jim said he left his Vespa and retrieved it, but also points out that the Vespa, that he couldn't find any sort of sign of Angerot. So he points out that Angerot seems to have disappeared from the sewer for the time being, and Blinky does conclude that that's actually that might be a good thing, but also points out that Jim is very lucky that he got the Killstone back. But then also proceeds to tell Jim that the obvious and the rest of the team the obvious problem, which is that now without his soul and without the Infernicopula, there is no way to control Angerot. And it's to anyone's guess as to what he'll do now that he's no longer on his leash. And sure enough, we see Strickler after having a very uncomfortable day at the dentist's office. He walks out later that night. He gets into his car, is very visibly, obviously very visibly distressed over what Jim did. He's massaging his jaw. He's very visibly in pain, in a little bit of pain, and he then proceeds to sit down and tries to recover. But then notices as he goes to reach for the steering wheel that the ring isn't on his finger anymore. And sure enough, he turns around and, much to his panic, Angerot charges right at his car and tries to attack him. So yeah. So first and foremost, let's discuss some of the things that this episode sets up. First and foremost, this episode establishes a potential new villain, because we find out that Angerot, we meet the person who made Angerot what he is. And while we don't fully know, we don't officially meet her, we don't know her name, we can infer that's who it is. Because all the names Angerot calls her by in this episode are all nicknames, or so to speak, for Morgana, an evil witch from Arthurian legend, who was Merlin's apprentice. She lost her right hand, and wound up becoming this all-powerful sorceress. It alludes that she's going to be an important figure in the story. They don't outright say what her role is yet, but she obviously plays an important role in the story since she's directly responsible for Angerot. She is responsible for both his magical prowess as a sorcerer, as well as being the one who created the Infernicopula and took his soul from him in the first place. So while she's not really important yet, and they don't really clarify what her role is going to be, they do imply that she's going to play some sort of significant role since she was the one who created Angerot and made him what he is, and is by extension an overarching antagonist for the second half of part 1.
because she created Angerot. He's the main antagonist that makes her the overarching antagonist. So, yeah. So yeah, that's gotta be important. But also, more to the point, now we are in a position where, and obviously, also Jim got the second stone of the Triumbric Stones, which means he is one step closer to being able to kill Gunmar. And that's gonna be an important thing going into parts 2 and 3. That's gonna be the main plot. But also more to the point, Angerot has lost his soul, and the Inferno Copula has been destroyed. Which means Angerot is both no longer on his leash, but also because he no longer has a soul, he is no longer capable of rational thought. He's a mindless killing machine now. He's just openly aggressive toward anything that moves. He will attack pretty much. He's still capable of three thought. I'm not gonna clarify that, but he's not able to really control his emotions all that well. He's just a savage beast now. He's just going after everything and anything that pissed him off previously. So, which of course includes Jim first and foremost, because Jim happened to be there when his soul was lost, but also Strickler, since for the longest time Strickler has been a thorn in his side and has effectively been his unreluctant master for pretty much the entirety of part 1, second half. So, yeah, obviously that's not going to be great for either both Strickler and Jim, because Angerot has a bone to pick with both of them. But yeah, that establishes that Jim is obviously Angerot is going to be a lot more dangerous going forward because of that reason. He's just going to be a lot more dangerous. But yeah, overall, yeah, this episode is an interesting turning point for the series so far, because obviously we're introduced to a new villain, and our current villain is basically off his nut. He's full blown loco now. But yeah, that's gonna be it for today. That's gonna do it for today's review. But that's where the series is going. We set up a new villain, and our current one is no longer the sophisticated killing machine that we know him as. He is now a mindless beast. But in any case, that's gonna do it for my review of Trollhunters. What you guys think? Let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below, or over on my Discord server, link in the description. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, be sure to follow me on Twitter in the description below. Be sure to check out my Patreon in the description below as well. It's only a couple bucks a month. It does really help me out. And you guys get access to a bunch of cool perks that are my way of saying thanks. So be sure to check those out. Link is down in the description. Also, be sure to check out my Discord. Link is down in the description as well. I like connecting with people over there, so please go hang out. Be sure to go and check out my Twitch. I stream Saturdays and Sundays. Again, please go check those out. And also, be sure to go, and also finally, if you want to see more content from me, then be sure to check out the videos linked in the end screen. The top video is the most recent video. It may or may not be this video. Whereas the bottom video is a video recommended to you based on what you've already seen from me. So if you want to try something new, or see more of what you like, then be sure to check both those videos out. But in any case, thank you guys so much for watching. And until next time, we'll see you guys in the next video.